Okay, so for this deep dive, you guys have really sent us some fascinating stuff. Yeah, exploring Brazil's place in the world, especially with this book, Brazil, Heart of the World, Homeland of the Gospel, and all the discussions around it.
It really is a fascinating topic, and I think you've hit on a central puzzle here. I mean, how do we look at some of the very real difficulties and challenges that exist in Brazil and square that with this idea of it being a place of such huge spiritual significance? It's amazing, actually, when you look at the stats. Something like 73% of spiritists who were surveyed actually agree with that spiritual designation.
it's a big question. That's what we're looking at today. We're going to try to do that. We're going to kind of look at some of the hard facts, some of the statistics around volunteerism and violence and corruption in Brazil. And then we'll try to really immerse ourselves in the perspective that's presented in this book
Yeah.
and understand the logic behind this whole spiritual designation, this idea of Brazil as a spiritual hospital, which is a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right in. You had some pretty stark numbers to share with us.
I did. I did. If we look at how actively people engage in their communities through volunteer work, the data tells us that only about 11% of Brazilians identify as volunteers. People who give their time and effort without expecting payment.
That's so low.
It is low. It is low. And even if we broaden the view and we look at the number of people who've ever volunteered at any point in their lives, that number only climbs to about 30%.
It's interesting when you think about a country that's, presented as having such a strong spiritual identity, the correlation there. It makes you wonder about the connection between life and action.
Yeah, it raises some really interesting questions. And then, when you turn to the issue of violence, the stats are really, really quite sobering. Brazil, unfortunately, has the highest absolute number of homicides globally, a staggering 58,800 per year,
Wow.
which translates to roughly 160 lives lost every single day.
Those are huge numbers. That's a difficult picture.
It is, and it's not just homicide, of course. The Pan American Health Organization estimates that there are about 1 million cases of violence that occur in Brazil annually, although they admit it's really difficult to get hard data in a nation as large and as complex as Brazil. We also see a really high incidence of vehicle theft. Almost 500,000 cars are stolen each year in Brazil, almost, one a minute.
It paints a picture of, significant social unrest and lack of security for people. And then, of course, you can't ignore the issue of corruption. The Operation Car Wash, or Lava Jato scandal, really exposed the deep-seated nature of corruption in Brazil.
Yeah.
Billions and billions of dollars in embezzled funds and, people in positions of great power and public trust. So, what's interesting here is to juxtapose those very real and significant challenges, those low levels of volunteerism, the high rates of violence, and the corruption against this assertion that Brazil is this heart of the world and the homeland of the gospel, right?
Yeah.
It seems contradictory on the surface. And so the question that we're, I think, really grappling with here is that central question: how do we reconcile these two things?
Yeah. How do we make sense of that?
How do we make sense of that? And this is where this book, Brazil, Heart of the World, Homeland of the Gospel, really steps in with a very distinctive and, I think, unexpected explanation. It doesn't ignore these difficulties. It actually almost provides a framework for understanding them. And it all comes down to its core premise.
Right.
So what is that core premise?
Well, the book opens with this scene. Christ, in his role as the governor of Earth, takes stock of the state of Christianity. And we're talking about over 15 centuries since the initial arrival of Jesus on Earth. And he's, according to the book, kind of disappointed. The gospel has spread, but the transformation that was hoped for hasn't really materialized. And there's a feeling of kind of disappointment.
Yeah.
And
Instead of just saying, okay, well, let's try somewhere else.
right, exactly.
The book suggests that he decides to establish a new kind of spiritual center. And he chooses Brazil as this focal point. And the reasoning that's given is fascinating. Brazil, according to the book, possesses this unique magnetic quality that makes it the heart of the world. And it talks about this transplant of the gospel tree to Brazilian soil. And there's a spirit governor, Ismail, who's entrusted with overseeing this monumental task. So initially, Jesus kind of lets events unfold without intervening. However, as the challenges and the negative influences that we talked about, the materialism of the Portuguese colonizers, the enslavement of Africans, the exploitation of indigenous populations, these things start to manifest. Ismail gets really troubled, kind of heartbroken. He starts to fear that maybe this whole spiritual endeavor is at risk. And this is where Jesus steps in with a solution that I think completely shifts our understanding of Brazil's spiritual purpose. And he instructs Ismail to, instead of bringing highly evolved souls, he says, bring all the spirits who have failed. Bring the inquisitors, bring the corrupt politicians, bring the murderous generals, the deceitful religious leaders of the past 3,000 or 4,000 years, and bring them all to reincarnate in Brazil. It's a pretty radical idea.
It is. And, the book portrays Ismail as being initially, shocked and disbelieving. But Jesus's reasoning is really, really pivotal here. The idea is that Brazil is not intended to be this showcase of spiritual perfection. It's not a gallery of saints. It's more like a great spiritual hospital. It's a place of healing and regeneration where these spirits that are burdened by their past actions can work through their mistakes and can evolve over many lifetimes. And
the book even gives some specific examples to illustrate this concept, which I think helps to really solidify this sort of mind-bending idea. For instance, it speaks of this soul who's weighed down by past transgressions, who finds redemption by reincarnating in Brazil as Fabiano de Cristo. And then there's another soul, weary from the abuse of power, chooses this path of humility and dedicated service as Father Manuel de Nobrega, who becomes the very well-known in Brazil, Emmanuel.
Right.
Yeah.
These examples really show the central theme, which is that Brazil's spiritual mission is one of healing and transformation for spirits that are carrying these, really heavy karmic debts. And the book also addresses the role of suffering in this whole process, that while it's often painful, it's a temporary but necessary catalyst for learning and for growth.
Yeah, I remember that. There's a quote in there, all suffering has an expiration date, which, when you think about it, offers a really interesting perspective on these earthly struggles. So if we try to connect this back to, the ongoing crises that we see in Brazil, the political instability, the economic challenges, the ethical dilemmas, the book doesn't present those as failures of this mission, but almost as consequences of these spirits who are repeating their past mistakes as they navigate this spiritual hospital environment.
Right. Exactly. And, the text even offers a really specific historical connection. It suggests that many of the individuals who were involved in the French Revolution, which was incredibly violent, are now reincarnated in Brazil, and that this could possibly be, explaining some of the societal conflicts that the nation currently faces. The important point, I think, is that Jesus reassures Ismail that this spiritual mission, this profound work of spiritual regeneration is paramount, that it even takes precedence over, the immediate political and economic development.
It's a really different way to look at
it is
a nation's struggle.
It really is.
But it also leads to, I think, a counter argument. Despite all of these difficulties, Brazil has produced some really significant spiritual figures.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we can't forget the contributions of people like Chico Xavier, Bezerra de Menezes, Divaldo Franco, Ivan Pereira. All of these people have had a huge impact on, not just Brazil, but the global spiritual landscape.
And it's also, we have to consider the sheer scale of spiritism in Brazil. It's the largest spiritist country in the world, which suggests, a deep and active spiritual engagement by a lot of people, even if the more traditional measures of things like volunteerism are a little bit lower on the charts. So I guess, it makes you wonder, how do we evaluate a nation's essence? How do we look at its global contribution? Is it purely through politics and economics? Or do we also have to weigh the spiritual influence in the contributions of its spiritually enlightened individuals?
That's a great question. That's the heart of it, right? And the book, ultimately, it reaffirms that central argument, that Brazil remains the heart of the world and the homeland of the gospel, not because it's perfect, not because it's a utopia, but because it serves this very unique role as this hospital of souls, right? Where spiritual healing and growth, which can't always be seen or measured, using traditional worldly standards, that is continuously taking place.
Yeah. As we kind of bring this deep dive to a close, the book's perspective, I think, is pretty clear. Brazil holds this really distinctive and crucial role, but the message pivots and comes back to the individual. It comes back to you, the listener.
Exactly. The text ends by suggesting that while Brazil might hold this designation, the question for each of us is, will it become the homeland of the gospel for us? Will we embrace those opportunities for spiritual growth and learning and transformation that are presented in this unique environment?
So it's a call to individual responsibility and to this ongoing process of spiritual evolution. It's interesting, the material you sent also has a really strong message of hope. And it talks about the ongoing nature of our spiritual journeys, and that even the earth itself is in this state of ascension, moving towards a higher spiritual vibration. And while some souls may need more opportunities, to learn and evolve, the overall direction is positive and towards enlightenment.
Right. Which leads us to our final thought for you all today that's drawn from the messages in this source material. The idea is that individual effort is crucial. We need to shine our light. We need to have trust in that divine plan, to hold on to love and wisdom, and to really cultivate patience and endurance in the face of life's challenges. These individual acts of striving for spiritual growth and embodying those positive qualities, they're presented as essential contributions to a new generation and to creating a better, more harmonious future for everyone. And it really does make you think about how our own personal journeys are tied into this much larger, maybe divinely orchestrated mission of healing and evolution.
It's a big idea.
It is.
It's a really big idea.
It is.
Thanks for sharing it.
Of course.
That's been fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'll do it again sometime.
Sounds great.